reading about the two women, I couldn't help but think of my mom, not because she was all that poor, um, but she had some wisdom about her. And I asked her one time, or I said to her, you know, something strange happens every once in a while. It's not like any miracle or anything, but on one day, somebody will stop me and say, can you help me out, Father? I need a little help, you know. They mean give me some money, you know. So I'd give some away. Sometimes I'd go all out and trust God, you know, and hand out more money. And then some days later, I'd be at my desk going through the mail, and I thought, oh, yeah, what's this? I open it up. Well, it was a check from the diocese for something I had done. And I thought, oh, that's the same amount I give away. Isn't that interesting? Take it in, put it in this and give it out. Whoa, wait a minute. Just passing it on. Mom was a very simple woman in her life. Mom and Dad lived a pretty normal life in the suburbs in the later days, earlier in the city. And there was a time when she started to take ill. And they had some problems earlier in the marriage when Dad had to be fired from his job. He was fired from his job 3 weeks before Christmas, and he was that way 3 months. And so they had no savings left. And yet, we would never know that as children because things seemed to stay the same, even though Dad was out of work. They had to apologize that there wouldn't be many gifts under the tree this year. But later, her health began to change. I remember she used to get up and try to keep adjusting the television. I thought, what? Mom, it's fine. Sit down. No, that's wrong. It's good. Then she'd go through her drawers, packing them and unpacking them, and then we realized she'd gone into bipolar. And in those days, all they could do is shock treatments. And one day I asked her, how you feeling, Mom? She said, well, I'm feeling okay. I think my brain's still there, although it went through kind of a trauma, I think. But then as Mom really started to get sick, I realized that her sickness was taking her away from us by all kinds of things that got lost and taken away. She had lost my dad some years earlier, and then eventually said it's time to move out of my house and went to a nice apartment. It was in that apartment that she suffered a stroke and was taken to the hospital. And after that, things were never quite the same. She recovered a bit, but there were times when she'd go to the hospital, come home and realize that something she brought to the hospital wasn't there anymore, that somebody took it out of her hospital room. And those little things kept happening. And so when she died, and Father Tom Dempsey, who was going to have the funeral for me, he said, tell me a little bit about your mom. I said, well, the interesting thing is the closer she got to death, more things kept disappearing out of her life. So by the time she died, there was little she had. In fact, in that year before she died, she was awake all the time, then stared at me when I came in, and she'd only speak a little line at a time. She'd look at the TV and say, they're having a lot of fun. And then she wouldn't say anything else the rest of the day. One day I went in, and this will give you an idea of priest moms. I said, Mom, I just got a new assignment. I said, I'm going to the cathedral. And she said, oh, nice. You know, like, priest mom, you're going to the cathedral. She picked up on that. But in the end, she took her last breath because her body was no longer taking on any fluids, any kind of nourishment. I thought of her because of these two women, one in the book of wisdom and one in the gospel. And in that book of wisdom, we meet this poor woman with a son and very little food left. She's about to go out and prepare her last meal for herself and her son, and Elijah appears. This prophet comes to her and realizes her situation and says something odd, I thought. Oh, by the way, give me a drink of water and a cake. And the cake was like part of a bread. And I thought to myself, didn't you hear what she said? She has nothing left. Why are you asking us for this? It's like he turned to me and said, just be quiet for a minute, will you? So he says, if you will give me this, I promise you that you will never be hungry again. It's not in the scriptures, but that's basically what he was doing. For when she gave him something to eat and shared her food with him, the scripture says, and she went on for a year like that. She always had plenty of what she needed. Interesting lesson. But by the time we get to the gospel, we find Jesus looking at another woman. This woman was very poor as well. She had little. And it was time to take the gifts to the temple. And everybody was doing that. But she put in the least she could have left. She gave it over. Now that could be an insult in a sense, or a criticism of how the temple was collecting money, that they had to take it from the poorest of the poor. Or maybe Jesus was saying, I congratulate you for being that generous with the little you have. And right before he had gone to the temple, he had a talk with his disciples, which makes me nervous every time I vest, or almost every time I vest. He was telling them, I don't want you as leaders of my people to act like the leaders that we have now in office, who love to go around in their long robes and be greeted on the street. Hi, Father. Hi, Father. Sit here, Father. Here's a little something extra, Father. They get the best seats wherever they go. Well, it doesn't always work in my case, but sometimes people are very generous that way. Oh, treat Father, treat Father. He says, I don't want you to ever do that. Do not lord your office over people. You're there to serve them. And how did this Jesus die? Little by little, things were removed from him. He was removed from freedom once he was put in jail or held by the officials. Little by little, his disciples started to wander away, saying, we don't know what's going on, but we want no part of it. We don't even know this man. His clothes were taken from him, replaced only with a crown of thorns. And it was on the cross where he was nailed, so he couldn't move his arms, he could hardly speak. And so in that moment when he could do nothing, the moment of salvation, when he could do nothing but give his life over to the Father in faith and belief and love of God. But the one thing he gave over that we miss sometimes in the scriptures is where it says he took his last breath, he took his breath, he breathed his final breath, his final spirit, as though he were giving it away to God, the Father. But the real translation says, what he was doing is leaving us his last will and testament, his breath, his spirit poured out over us. Over us. And today, this day, when he gathers us together, where do we find him most present? Certainly among us, certainly in the Word, but when he really wants to nourish us, he invites us to a table. And he gives his disciples and us a small sip of the wine, almost like all that woman had left, and a small piece of bread, all that woman had. He said, take this and eat and drink this. And then he said, do this in memory of me. What does that mean? Does it mean I want you to have Mass every day? I want you to break bread every day. I want you to drink from the cup every day. It could mean that, but it wasn't the practice in the early church, but it became a practice. Or it could have meant, I want you to gather as a community always so that you may be nourished with each other's presence and with what we eat at the table. Or is he saying, I want you to wash one another's feet? What does this mean? Do this in memory of me. It means it all. It means to breathe in his breath, his spirit he gives us. It means to take that bread into our lives and take that cup and its contents into our lives and become what we eat and what we drink.